Alrighty. So, we're going to start Unit 2 here, guys. Okay? And we're going to talk about cell theory and microscopy today. Okay? Basically, guys, we start all the units with kind of a little bit of the history of the science and what's sort of the basic unit of that particular branch of science. The basic unit of chemistry is the atom. Okay? The basic unit of biology is the cell. All right? We spend probably the first half of this unit looking at the cell, not just being able to go, well, that's the nucleus and that's the cell membrane and this is what they do. Yes, there's some of that. Okay? There's a lot of memorize and regurgitate in bio. All right? But it isn't all about that. We also look at how does the cell function, how are there kind of interactions between the different parts of the cell, how does getting really big affect the cell, does it work better if it's small, all right? All kinds of things about that kind of stuff. We also have to look at using a microscope properly, because on Monday and Thursday of next week we'll be in the lab using the microscopes, okay, and looking at things and drawing lab diagrams. Actually, we do that a little differently. We don't draw them by hand anymore. Technology is better than that, so now we don't have to draw. Your phone has a camera on it, okay? You just stick the camera on the microscope and wait till you see it and snap a picture of it, okay? That's way better than any of us can probably draw, especially me. Okay, all of my people still have the legs and arms coming out of the head. Okay, yeah, I'm not a very good artist. Okay, so what we got to get out of today is we have to know the points of the cell theory. All right, in the same way that there was an atomic theory, there's also a cell theory. Okay, and how they relate to living organisms. We have to know who contributed to the development of the cell theory. There's a few important people, less than in the chemistry unit. Okay, there's really only 4. And then recognize the implication of the similarities between plant and animal cells in terms of evolutionary relationships. Okay, when you look at an animal and a plant side by side, so like this, okay, there's not a lot of similarities, right? I mean, yeah, I'm wearing green today because it's St. Patrick's Day, but okay, other than that, there's not a lot in common, right? Okay, and the way we get our energy is also much different. All right, plants, they just use the sun and carbon dioxide and water, and they can make their own food. Okay, if that was so for us, every time you got hungry, you'd just have to walk out in the sun and you wouldn't feel hungry anymore. Which would probably be pretty sweet, really, but okay, it doesn't work that way for us. Okay, we have to actually go out and consume other organisms for food, sometimes plants. All right, so when you look at us in terms of the big picture, there's a lot of differences. But when you get down to looking at our cells, there's a lot more that's the same than there is different. Okay? And that says something about where we both came from. Right? If our cells look a lot alike, and yes, there's some differences, but in general, the processes are the same, the structures are the same, in general, with a few small differences. Okay? That says something about where we both came from. Okay, and the likelihood is that there was some shared common ancestor way back in early Earth's history, okay, that actually gave rise to both plants and animals. All right, and we'll talk more about that, okay, later on in the unit. Okay, points of the cell theory. The first point of the cell theory is very much like the first point of the atomic theory. Okay, all living organisms are made of cells. Okay? If something is alive, it has cells. Okay? What I usually ask right around this point is, what are some other characteristics of a living organism? What if something is going to be alive, what are some things it's got to be able to do? Okay, let's say exchange gases, because plants don't breathe per se, but they still exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay? What else? Okay, reproduce. Okay, take in energy, have some sort of metabolism, right? Okay, they got to burn fuel. Okay, what else? All organisms make it. Waste. Okay, so they've got to exchange gases, they've got to make energy, they've got to reproduce, and okay, they make waste. So all living organisms have got to be able to do those things. Okay, that means fire is alive. Fire exchanges gases, oxygen for carbon dioxide. Okay? It reproduces. If a spark lands somewhere where there's no fire, it will start another fire. Okay? I know that's a stretch, but follow me here. Okay? It makes wastes. Okay? Fire makes lots of waste. Okay? And it has some sort of making energy. Well, fire is always making energy. It's burning stuff. Okay? So by those qualifications, fire is alive. Well, obviously fire is not alive. It's a chemical reaction. Okay? It's the first point of the cell theory that takes it out of the running. Fire is not made of cells. Okay? Now, are there some organisms then that are borderline? Like, they maybe don't contain cells, but we might think they are alive. Like what? Viruses. Okay? Viruses are small infectious particles. They do not have cells. Okay? They have no nucleus, they don't have a cell membrane, nothing. All a virus is a thin strand of genetic material, DNA or RNA, surrounded by a shell of protein. Okay? That's all a virus is. It cannot produce its own energy. All right? If a virus is outside of a cell for a short period of time, it will die. Because it cannot make its own, it cannot carry out its own metabolism. Okay? Can't break down sugar for energy, can't carry out photosynthesis, can't do any of that stuff. All right? So, it's not really alive by the strictest definition, but it can sure cause a lot of problems. Okay? Everybody with me there? I mean, we've all had the flu, right? Okay? We've all had a virus at some point in our life. Okay? And they are quite pesky. Okay? And they can come on very quickly. All right? You've all had this sensation, right? You go to bed and you're like, oh, I got the scratchy throat. You know, I got the tickle in my throat. And you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, I'm going to have to get better to die. Okay? Like, you know, you just feel awful, right? Okay? Because they reproduce so quickly. Okay? A virus gets into one of your cells, and here's what it does. Okay? It puts its DNA into the nucleus of your cell, where all of your DNA is. Okay? And it essentially cuts a piece of your DNA out and then splices it in. So your cell thinks it belongs there. Now your DNA tells your cell how to make stuff. Okay, there's a part of your DNA that tells it how to make insulin, and another part that tells it how to make adrenaline, and how to make pigments for your skin, and the pigment that colors your eyes and your hair, and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, all of that is encoded in your DNA. So once that little piece of DNA gets spliced into yours, your cell, instead of making whatever was there before, starts making viruses. Because that's what that DNA codes for. Okay? It's the virus's DNA. So it's like a set of instructions on how to build a virus. Now, your cell, unfortunately, is like the guy that builds IKEA furniture without looking at the instructions. Okay? It's like, okay, here's all the pieces, put them together. Okay? It doesn't actually look to see what it's building. It's just, oh, I got these pieces. Sweet, I'm going to put them together. I don't care what it makes. Okay? And pretty soon a shelving unit turns into something else. Okay? Well, so instead of building insulin or adrenaline, your cell starts churning out viruses. Well, here's the problem, though, with that. Okay? I mean, obviously, there's a problem in that it's churning out viruses. But whatever it was supposed to be making, it's not making. So the cell's machinery keeps telling it, hey, I need that stuff I told you about last week. Okay? You still haven't made that stuff. I'm still waiting on this stuff. And the cell just keeps pounding it out. Okay? Thinking is building what it was asked for, but what is it building instead? Viruses. Okay? And in a matter of an hour, okay, that single cell can churn out hundreds or thousands of viruses. Because viruses are very simple. It takes almost nothing to make them. Right? So the cell just starts filling up with viruses because it just keeps hitting the copy button. Okay? And it just keeps making more and more and more and more and more until the cell just pops. And now you've gone from having one virus to having thousands. And each one of those viruses latches onto a cell and does the same thing. So overnight you go from feeling okay to awful. Okay? Now, the thing of it is, though, is those viruses, if they don't attach to a cell, are dead in a matter of minutes. Because they can't carry out any metabolism of their own. All right? Everybody follow me there? It's kind of a weird thing. But they're not really alive, even though they can do some of the things that a living organism can do. They can reproduce. Okay, but they can't carry out metabolism. They can't produce wastes. Okay, they don't really exchange gases, and they're not made of cells. I mean, it's hard to argue that they're really alive, except that they have DNA and they can reproduce. Okay, can they reproduce on their own? No, they actually use your cell. They hijack your cell, okay, and make it do what they want. So yeah, it's kind of a weird thing, right? They're not really alive. There's a lot of debate on that. What's that? How does the virus stop? Well, the reason you feel so incredibly crappy when you have a virus is because the only way to kill a virus is to kill the cells that are infected. So your immune system goes out and kills your own cells in order to kill the virus. Okay? Because when the virus latches onto your cell, a piece of it sticks out. Okay? The immune system can recognize that that's foreign, and it'll kill it. Okay? That's why you have to get the right kind of blood when you get a blood transfusion. It's why if you get an organ transplant, they have to depress your immune system completely. Otherwise, your body will attack it because it knows it doesn't belong there. Okay? So it identifies things it knows don't belong there, and it kills them. That's what your immune system does. Okay? So eventually, you feel really weak because your body's just going, you're infected. You got to take one for the team. Okay? Yeah, that's the only way to get rid of them. Okay? Bacteria are different. Bacteria are their own little cells. They go about your body and they just produce toxins that make you feel vile. Okay? So they work differently. Right? They are actual cells. They are actual living organisms, and they produce toxic chemicals as their waste products. It's the toxic chemicals that make you feel rotten. Okay? Viruses don't produce any toxic chemicals. They just take over your cells and make your body kill itself. Right? So it's nasty. Okay? Your body is constantly having to break itself down in order to get rid of this stuff. Okay? That's why viruses like HIV are so incredibly problematic. Okay? Because HIV infects your immune system cells. All right? So the cells that are supposed to get rid of it are the ones that are carrying it. All right, so when they go to get rid of it, they ingest it and they're infected. All right, and that's why HIV can then eventually depress your immune system down to the point where you get an infection from something you would normally fight off. Okay, and it can kill you. Okay, most people who actually die of AIDS, okay, don't die from the AIDS virus or the AIDS syndrome. They actually die from pneumonia caused by some bacterial infection that you would have probably never even gotten sick from otherwise. Okay, like how many of you have had strep throat before? Okay, I mean, and you all got over it, right? And you took some penicillin and you got better. Okay, someone who's in the latter stages of AIDS will die from a strep throat infection because their immune system can't fight it off. Okay, yeah, stuff like that. Okay, so examples of cells. Some organisms are single-celled. We call that unicellular. Like a unicycle has one wheel, unicellular means one cell. Okay, so this is a single-celled organism, okay, called an actinopod. They live in the ocean. Okay, this is a paramecium, okay, single-celled organism that lives in like sloughs and pond water and stuff like that. Okay, and obviously multicellular organism, a cactus. Okay, what do they have in common? They all have cells. Okay, therefore they're all living organisms. All right. Second and third points of the cell theory are probably the ones that are the ones you have to think about more. Okay? The second one tells us, what does a cell do? Okay? Cells carry out the basic functions of an organism. The same things that your body does on a large scale are done by cells on a small scale. All right? If you eat food, your digestive system digests it, okay, gets rid of the stuff you can't use, all right, and the cell does the same thing. Okay? At a much smaller level, it'll ingest small molecules. It'll, use them, whatever, break them down chemically, and then release whatever it can't use. Okay? On a small scale, it's doing the same thing. Okay? Where your lungs will bring in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, your cell will do the same thing through its cell membrane. It just doesn't have lungs. Okay, it's just on a much smaller scale. So they're carrying out the basic functions, exchanging gases, okay, carrying out metabolism, that's burning sugars or whatever, okay, getting rid of waste products, making protein, okay, all of that kind of stuff. It's all done at a cellular level as well. Okay, and thirdly, new cells are not created. They come from the division of existing cells. There is no factory in your body that's churning out cells. Okay? Every cell in your body came from one cell. Okay? So, about 16 years ago, okay, for you guys, a sperm and an egg met. Okay, and they produced a single cell called a zygote. Okay, that's what a fertilized egg is called. All right, that single cell divided over and over and over and over again. Okay, to produce you. All right, now obviously not you in this form. Okay, but you as a little baby. Right? Oh, so over the course of, like 40 weeks, okay, that's what happens. Okay, that cell divides over and over and over again. Okay, for the first, few days, okay, of that division process, it's just a little ball of cells. Okay, after the first few days, some of those cells start to differentiate. They become specialized. Okay, some of them will be destined to become your brain and spinal cord, and others will become destined to become your digestive system, your muscles, your bones. Okay, things like that. Okay, there's kind of a fate for every cell in that ball of cells, and then it starts to take shape. Okay, you can actually see that sort of fetus shape, okay, that kind of comes along, okay, and it kind of goes from there. Okay, the big thing though is that at the moment you are conceived, when sperm met egg, the DNA was there to make you, because every cell in your body has that same DNA. All right, you guys follow me on that one? Okay. Question for you? No. Okay. So from that point on, obviously every cell in your body is simply divided to continue making new cells. All right, or to make more cells. So there's nothing in your body that's actually just pumping out cells. Cells just divide when they get to a certain size or they get to a certain age or whatever. Okay, they divide. Okay, questions so far? Okay, did you highlight all 3 points of the cell theory? If you didn't, you should have. Okay, because there'll definitely be stuff. We'll keep relating back to that. Most of our labs, the analysis is going to relate back to what do cells do, okay, and things like that. All right, the important people and what they did. Hooke, 1665. Like so many great scientific discoveries, this was also an accident. Okay, Hooke is a physicist. Okay, he's actually well, unfortunately, he's probably to his chagrin known as the guy who discovered cells. Okay, but he was a physicist. He has a law in physics that you'll take in Physics 20, Hooke's law. Okay, and it's about spring force. Okay, and what happens when you compress or stretch a spring. Okay, his building of the microscope was a physics experiment on lenses and the bending and refraction of light. Okay, that's what he was doing when he built the first microscope. He was playing around with lenses and seeing what happened to the path of light when you ran it through lenses. Okay, and lo and behold, he said, hey, it looks like things get bigger. I'm going to put some stuff underneath this thing and see what it looks like when it's bigger. All right, one of the things he decided to look at was a slice of cork. Okay, where does cork come from? It comes from trees. Okay, what's that? They are very endangered, which is why actually very few wines and liquors anymore actually have real corks in them. They're mostly synthetic materials now because they had essentially harvested cork down to nothing, okay, to cap off booze for people. Okay, okay, and obviously there's much better ways synthetically to do that. Okay, in fact, lots of like wine now. It used to be you always needed a corkscrew. Now it's like a twist off cap. Okay, it kind of looks cheap, but okay, it still seals, so it's not that big a deal. But yeah, cork comes from a tree. Okay, so what he did is he took a really thin slice of it and he put it under the microscope, and this is what he saw. Okay, he saw all these what he called little rooms. He thought it looked like, like a monastery or a prison. Okay, there were all these little rooms. Okay, and little rooms are called cells. Okay, in a monastery or a prison, all the little rooms are cells. Okay, that's what he named. That's where he got the name from. All right, so he's the guy who discovered cells. Now he called them cells because he thought they looked like empty rooms. Right, but when you slice a cork, it's not alive anymore. Okay, that tree has been dead for some time. So all the little parts that are normally in a cell that would make it look everything other than empty, okay, were no longer there. All right, all that was left was the cell wall. All right, which is essentially the wood, okay, that makes up a tree, or kind of the the fleshy part, okay, of the tree. Everyone follow me there? Okay, so he's the guy who discovered cells purely by accident. Okay, his microscope could magnify about 30x, which is like what a good magnifying glass could do. Okay, the microscopes you're going to use have a 400x lens as their high power lens. All right, Next guy, Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Okay, he made the microscope that looked like this. Luckily, it didn't catch on. Okay, it's very difficult to use. However, was fairly well thought out. Okay, he would put the object that he was going to view on the top of this little thing here. If you blow up this piece here, it kind of had a concave top to it. Okay, so it kind of looked like this, and he could put like fluid kind of in this top part here, and then light would go through this fluid, okay, and into the lens, and then the lens would diverge the light like this and blow it up. Okay, so if you put it a long ways away, or you had a screen or something like that, you could see it really big. Okay, and that's kind of how his microscope worked. Now, you needed a pretty bright light source if you were going to do that, though. Okay, so when he used this thing and he got it working, okay, he was actually able to magnify stuff 300 times, which means he could see things that were pretty small. All right, so he chose to look at small things. He looked at blood cells. He looked at stuff that was in pond water. He got sperm cells from a bull somehow. Seems pretty brave to me. I don't know, okay, how you go about doing that, but okay, yeah. I don't know. Seems pretty brave. I don't know. Okay. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that he looked at. All right. So he was actually able to see living cells, something Hooke never saw. All the cells that Hooke looked at were dead. Okay. So Leeuwenhoek was able to see that cells actually did stuff, and they weren't empty. Okay. And that was a pretty important discovery, because that meant cells aren't just in plants. Cells are in everything, and they're a lot alike. All the cells he saw were a lot alike, okay? And that was a really important discovery in terms of understanding what are organisms made up of and what kind of processes do they carry out. Okay, so building on his discovery, two Swedish guys came along. Okay, Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, okay, come along, and they do all this stuff. Okay, their hypothesis is this: if the basic unit of life is the cell, and tissue from various types of organisms is viewed under a microscope, then cells will be found in all living things. Okay? That was what they were working on. And that is the first point of the cell theory, because these are the two guys who came up with it. Okay? First point is all living organisms are made of cells. Okay? These guys spent years looking at the tissue from all kinds of living things. Okay? They looked at bacteria, they looked at fungus, they looked at animals, at plants. Okay? Basically anything they could think of that they hadn't looked at before, they checked for the presence of cells. Okay? And they found cells in basically all of them. All right. Okay, so essentially our understanding of cells got better as our equipment got better. Okay, Schleiden and Schwann, they had oil immersion lenses that were capable of magnifying 600 times. Okay, if you go to university, you can use light microscopes with oil immersion lenses that are good to 800 to even 1,000 times magnification. They're really hard to focus, they're really finicky. Okay, but when you get used to using them, you can see some pretty cool stuff that's pretty small. All right, if you want to see really small stuff, you need an electron microscope. Obviously, that wasn't around at the time of Schleiden and Schwann. Okay. Now, what we've noticed now is this similarity. Cells are everywhere, and cells are a lot alike. No matter what organism they're in, they contain similar structures, and they do similar things. Okay, and that's led to the idea, okay, that maybe there was a common ancestor, okay, kind of a grandfather of everything, okay, somewhere back in Earth's early history. All right. Okay, so during the creation of the Earth, the formation of the Earth, okay, something happened that allowed, okay, cells essentially to form. All right. Now, I'm not saying that what you're learning in religion class is wrong, because I would never say that. Okay, because it's not. Okay, and we're going to have a lesson about halfway through the unit where I'll talk the whole class about how the creation idea and the evolution idea go perfectly together. Okay, they go perfectly together, and actually Pope Francis has talked about that several times, that science and religion do not have to be the mortal enemies everyone thinks they have to be. Okay, Father Yarrick actually at the beginning of the year had a sermon that was all about that as well. Okay, how evolution and creationism don't disagree with each other. They actually, if you look at what science says happened and what the Bible says happened, it goes in exactly the same order. Okay, it's just the timeline that's different. Okay, so we'll talk all about that a little bit later on in the unit. Okay, but if we look here, we've got an animal cell on the left and a plant cell on the right. Now, obviously, there are some differences. Okay, but are there a lot of things the same? Okay, so we got the nucleus, that's the same. Okay, this blue stuff, same in both. Okay, this orange thing is in there. Okay, these orange things, they're in both. Okay, so there's lots and lots of similarities. Okay, way more than there are differences, and that seems to say, look, there's no way that can be by accident. Okay, and there's no way that plants and animals evolved them separately and then suddenly showed them both. Okay, it's much more likely that they came from a common ancestor. Okay, it's the whole idea of the doppelganger. Okay, you guys know what a doppelganger is? Okay, that's someone out there that looks exactly like you. Okay, probably doesn't happen, right? If someone looks a lot like you, are they probably related to you? Yeah, okay? It's not by accident that you look, okay, like your siblings, or you look like your parents, or you look like your grandparents. Okay, it's not by accident. You came from them. Okay? Well, it's the same idea here. These cells, plant and animal, probably came from a similar ancestor long ago. All right? So we'll talk about that, okay, a bit later on. Now, tomorrow, because we're going to run out of time here pretty quick. Okay, we'll talk about microscopy. Okay, I'll show you the microscope, and then we'll move on to cells and things like that. Thursday and Friday, okay, you'll have a sub in here. Mrs. Repke, I think, is going to be my sub. So on those days, you will be watching podcasts of the lessons that I would have taught were right here. Okay, please pay very close attention to those, because the next week you'll have quizzes on what was on them. Okay, and on Monday, obviously, we're going to start the microscopy lab. So that's what's coming up for you here. Okay, we'll get as much done tomorrow as we can.